I'm Ben Meiselas from the MeidasTouch Network. New York Attorney General Letitia James is ready to go to trial in her civil fraud case against Donald Trump, his adult children other than Ivanka, and his businesses like the Trump Organization. This case is going to trial soon, folks. Donald Trump is trying to escape from it, ranting and raving and whining like a complete baby, but that's not helping him at all. And New York Attorney General Letitia James just filed a summary judgment motion telling the judge, Justice Arthur Engoron, that there are no disputed facts at all. In fact, even though she was originally suing for $250 million, she states that in many years, Donald Trump was engaged in billions of dollars in fraudulent valuations in single years alone. Donald Trump is trying to get the case dismissed in his own summary judgment motion, but that ain't going to happen. Justice Arthur Engoron, who's presiding over the case, said, come hell or high water, this date is etched in stone. That trial will begin early October. So folks, this is happening soon. And by the way, as part of the motions that were just filed, we now have deposition transcripts after Donald Trump waived his Fifth Amendment right. Remember, in the first deposition, when it was just a special proceeding, Donald Trump invoked his Fifth Amendment right against self-incrimination. Now Donald Trump actually testified within the case itself. And New York Attorney General Letitia James got some good information. Donald Trump lied and claimed Mar-a-Lago was worth $1.5 billion. He claims his NFTs individually were worth like $82.5 thousand each. And he threw Eric Trump under the bus as well, saying that his son Eric knew more about the business than he did after making those outrageous and outlandish valuations, fraudulent valuations during the deposition itself. So folks, I want to show you the analysis that I did with Michael Popok, my co-host on Legal AF, about this massive New York Attorney General case that could shut down the Trump Organization. Let's play the clip. Now let's talk about the New York Attorney General civil case. Civil means the case is about money. Money damages is what would be awarded at the end of this process. Also, an injunction to try and which would, if instituted, would stop Donald Trump and his adult kids from doing business in the state of New York. Lots of money, too. New York Attorney General Letitia James is suing Donald Trump for at least $250 million. I think at trial she'll be asking for some, even significantly more than that. She filed what's called a motion for summary judgment. Donald Trump also filed a dueling summary judgment to try to get the case dismissed. A summary judgment basically says, Judge, there are no disputed facts here, so you should just decide, even before a trial, that if the plaintiff is the one bringing it, which is usually more rare, but plaintiffs bring summary judgment, Judge, you should find that the defendant is liable. We don't even need a trial, or we could just go to trial on damages. Where a defendant brings a summary judgment, they're saying, Judge, there's no disputed facts here. And such, you should dismiss this case. We don't need a trier of fact to decide anything. Just say that this case is dismissed based on the pleading. So that's what these dueling summary judgment motions are doing. Popok, I want you to break down what New York Attorney General argued and why it's so important. Also, this case goes to trial in about the next 30 days. It's going to trial in early October. And then before you do that, though, I just want to remind everybody, I was just thinking about the debate that we had over Judge Cannon and Marco Rubio, but I want to remind people to check out your origin story at the after show at MeidasTouch's Patreon site. So it's patreon.com/MeidasTouch. You can hear all about Popok's origin story and how he joined the MeidasTouch network, how I met Popok. That's Patreon, patreon.com/MeidasTouch. Popok, tell us about the New York.
And I know we're thinking about a potential Patreon for Legal AF. Maybe we'll put a poll up tonight in the chat and see if people want to have some special stuff that comes along with that.
That'd be great
as well. But look, I'll tell you the interesting thing is the thing you said at the top of the segment, Ben, is that nobody so far, and maybe we'll wake up on Tuesday or over the weekend even, and I will be proven wrong, but the defense, the lawyers representing Donald Trump in the New York Attorney General case, which used to be Alina Habba, but now is her partner, her firm is still involved, and I think Chris Keiss no one's filed a motion to continue the case. 6 months ago, Judge Engoron said, hell or high water, I don't care. I know there's other trials that could be scheduled. It's October the 20, whatever, and that's when we're going to trial. And you'd think, I'm sure they were waiting to see if any of these other criminal cases were going to give them a good faith basis to ask for a continuation, a stay of the case. But nothing's happened so far. And even though Letitia James just a month ago in an interview on a podcast of all places, not ours, although we definitely invite Letitia James to come onto our podcast, any of the podcasts in the MeidasTouch network at any time, whenever she'd like, morning, noon, or night. But when she gave her interview, she said, no, I fully expect that my case is going to get bumped, and that's okay. We'll pick it up at another time. But it's not going to get bumped because A, you've got the immovable force of a state court judge that wants to go to trial and has said, I'm not moving it. And nothing has really happened since that would change the expectations of the case going to trial. So I assume they're up to their elbows and necks getting prepared for a $250 million plus disgorgement case alleging civil fraud. And in anticipation of that, they now have to deal with both sides, I guess, do with competing motions for partial summary judgment, which is a statement by or motion by the New York Attorney General that says, at least on the issue of the fact that he lied about a value of his properties, we don't even have to put on a trial in front of a jury in front of that. The undisputed factual record, Judge, as this judge noted in a prior hearing when he got frustrated based on representations that were being made in his court, and he said, the value of Trump Tower and his apartment there is empirical. It's either the number that he said it was, or it's some other number. But we don't, I don't really understand what the debate is over. He anticipated the summary judgment or called for it, asked for it many, many months ago. And she's answered the call and filed a motion that has said, he said his apartment in New York is worth $300 million. Just to put that in perspective, the highest sale price for any unit in New York, even on Billionaires Row, which is what it's called in Manhattan, is I think $125 million by a hedge fund guy out of Chicago. Okay, which is a beautiful apartment overlooking Central Park, like five-story apartment. For Donald Trump to say his apartment's worth $300 million because he pumped up the square footage of it, that's where the judge said, look, it's either 10,000 square feet or it's 50,000 square feet. But that is a number that can be established. And she said, if you go through all of his trophy properties, the ones that he said in his deposition are the Mona Lisa or Renoir paintings hanging on a wall. They're whatever value people will place on them as trophy properties. She said, if you go through all these trophy properties, Mar-a-Lago, Bedminster Golf Course, 40 Wall Street, down by the Federal Reserve, which is a half-empty building that's been half-empty for a long, long time. Trump Tower, the apartment in Trump Tower, there is value. There is a number that can be established for it. There is a size and square footage of it. And he lied about it on his financial statements. He lied about it, about having independent appraisals. And we don't have to even go to a jury on it. There's no dispute. The fact that Donald Trump spends 400 pages of testimony to her talking about, and I'm not making this up, that he just considers the price to be irrelevant as set by an appraiser because his buildings are in his properties are like a Renoir or a piece of fine art, and it's whatever somebody makes up a number to buy it for, and it doesn't relate to the amount of revenue that the property generates or its expenses or its rent roll. You can't put a number on it like that because I own it. I mean, that is not going to fly, and that's not the law, and that shouldn't go before a jury, right? His subjective thoughts about how much. Listen, I got a car. This is true. I've got a used car that I'm about to sell. I would love to sell that used car for $35,000. Unfortunately, the market tells me it's worth $16,000. And so that is what I'm going to be able to sell it for. And no amount of me talking about it is going to change the empirical truth of the value intrinsically.
Take that car example. Take that car example, because here's what Trump would do, right? He would say that the car is not valued at even $35,000. He would say the car is valued at $1 million. And then based on saying that he now has $1 million in equity, basically in this car, he would then go to a bank or a lender or whoever and say, hey, can you give me 80% loan to value on that $1 million car? So I'd like to have $800,000 on the $1 million car, and then I'll pay it back over 30 years, which then he then fights the banks and doesn't pay it back. But then he takes that $800,000 in cash that he's pulled out after making that representation, and then he spends it somewhere else and then does the exact same thing to that property. What then he'll take the $800,000 to do and say, oh, there's this piece of land over here in Westchester. I'm making it up. I'm going to go and buy that. And then he goes, well, now that's Trump land. So even though I bought that land with the $800,000 that I pulled out of the car, which is really worth $17,000, I now believe that my land is valued at $10 million and that there's even a $20 million easement on that $10 million property. So you know what, government? I now want a $20 million tax deduction off of my taxes, because I'll give you an easement on the land that I bought for $800,000 that I now claim is worth $10 million. Then what does he do with the $10 million piece of property? He takes out $8 million, say 80% loan to value, and then has repeated that his
that's
entire
Seven
career.
Springs, by the way. That's actually, that's actual property.
That's again, and I wanted to give it an example.
But
then what he'll say though is, well, hey, the banks are happy. I've paid back the loan on the car. They got their $800,000. Well, first off, where'd you get it? Well, when you now inflated the price of the other property and you pulled out a loan there, you robbed Peter basically to pay Paul. So sure, Paul's happy, but Peter may not be happy. Down the line, they may not be, but their happiness is irrelevant at the end of the day if you're basically using this Ponzi scheme style model, which is the way I just described it. Which is kind of what's going on here, because who's getting screwed? Like all of us. Like the people like Michael Popok, who's going to sell his car for $17,000. You at home, you're not waking up, people who watch Legal AF, I hope not, and thinking to yourself, how am I going to overinflate the value of this and extract this and do that? No, you're going about paying taxes that you're supposed to pay. You're going about your life doing the things that you're supposed to do.
And the bank has a finite amount of money. And if somebody takes out more than they're entitled to, it's less for the mom and pop to borrow from. This is the problem with his number. And this is where she got him in the deposition. And I'm going to do a hot take on it later. The Doral golf course, which has the Blue Monster down in Florida, which I haven't played, but I've been over there. She said to him, well, what do you think the value of that is? He says, oh, it's, I don't know, $2.5 billion. He said, really? How do you come up with that? Now, you'd be thinking, oh, well, he has appraisals. He's gone to a bank. There's estimates. They've done cost benefit analysis. They've taken the rent roll and the amount that he said, no. He said, I could build a lot of houses there one day. So have you done any of that research? Have you applied for any of the zoning variances to build a lot of houses on that? No. But this is what you said. It's a Trump property. And when it's a Trump property, it's a made up number in my mind. And to say that it's victimless, which is what he's been arguing, that the banks don't mind. I paid back Deutsche Bank all the money that I owed them last year when I refinanced everything else, as you said, as part of the Ponzi scheme. But they are victims, because if it would be like, to continue these analogies, it would be like somebody who robbed a bank and then paid it back and said there's been no crime. The fact that he took out $1 billion when he really, based on the value of the property, was only capable of taking 250 million, that he paid back the whole billion doesn't mean he hasn't committed a crime. Sure, they've been made whole, but they overlent to somebody who didn't deserve it. That's called fraud, and that's the basis of the case. Now, he's filed his motion for just to round it out, he's filed his motion for summary judgment because they did get the defense one win recently. They argued, and the appellate court just above the court that this trial is in, the First Department Court of Appeals in New York, said that there is a statute of limitations that applies, and certain of these transactions, she didn't bring her case fast enough, and they fall off the continuum. They can't be the basis of her case under her broad powers of Executive Law 63-12 in New York, which is anti-fraud provisions for the Attorney General. And they cut Ivanka out because of that, because she sort of fell off. The bad things that Ivanka could have been charged with happened before the statute of limitations ran. So they're arguing again that her case is too broad, that many of the properties and valuation issues that she continues to raise, Judge, are beyond what the appellate court said is the proper statute of limitations. You should shrink or dismiss this case. I don't think he's going to grant that. He does have to apply the appellate court decision, though, and get the dates right about what properties are in and out of the case, and I'm sure he will do that. So the case will be tailored a little bit more, but it's going to trial. He's going to have to make this ruling. Ben, they just filed these motions a couple of days ago. Each side gets the chance to oppose it and file a last brief, and then the judge has to make a decision while they all get ready for trial. So, that's the fevered activity that's going on, while Donald Trump acts like nothing's going on in his world, even though he's got 7 cases set over the next 9 months. I said on a hot take recently, I assure you, the vast majority of law firms in this country do not, I would say 99% of them don't have 7 cases set over the next 9 months like Donald Trump does for himself.
There you have it, folks. And that's from the podcast I do called Legal AF with Michael Popok. If you haven't watched it before, make sure you subscribe to the Legal AF podcast wherever audio podcasts are available. Check it out. And also subscribe to our YouTube right here by hitting the subscribe. It's free. If you want to learn more about Michael Popok's origin story, go to patreon.com/MeidasTouch. patreon.com/MeidasTouch. There's a special video featuring Michael Popok where he talks about how he joined the MeidasTouch and how he became a lawyer. Thanks for watching.
Hey, Meidas Mighty. Love this report? Continue the conversation by following us on Instagram @MeidasTouch to keep up with the most important news of the day. What are you waiting for? Follow us now.